I believe every man should buy secondhand clothes. In fact, I've built a big part of my wardrobe that way. But after several years of doing this, I've realized that there are some serious downsides that almost nobody talks about. So today, I want to share 5 problems I've personally run into and how you can avoid them or make better decisions next time. The first issue is one of the biggest problems with secondhand clothing, especially if you buy online. And that's the fit problem, because there is a lot of inconsistent sizing. This could be between brands, but even within the same brand, you could have different sizes for the same items. To give you an example, I bought several shoes from a German shoemaker, and except for 2 of them, they all fit perfectly. And those 2 were at least a size larger. And I'm sure you had the same experience with some other items. Maybe you're a size L with a specific brand, but in another brand, you would be M or XL. So what can you do? One of the most important things to do before you buy any clothes secondhand is to write down measurements for all of the items that fit you well, because that way you can compare them with the measurements given by the seller. And I would say that in 90 or 95% of the cases, that's going to work fine. In the other 5 or 10%, it can still happen that on paper, all of the measurements are perfect. I've had this happen a couple of times, but once the item arrives, it just looks weird. It doesn't really fit well. For example, in this coat right here, everything is great. The shoulder width, the chest width, the sleeve length, but the way that the coat is cut just looks a little bit weird. Keep in mind also that not everybody takes the measurements the same. So you could ask the seller for measurements, but the way they took them might be completely different from the way you did it. So it could be off by 1, 2, or even 3 centimeters. So keep in mind that having your measurements on hand is incredibly important, but there might still be a few times where it wouldn't fit. The second issue with thrifting is the condition of the item. Because I've seen it many times that people upload an item and they say that the condition is excellent or like new, but from the photos alone you can already tell that it has some stains, it has some holes, it doesn't really fit the description at all. So you have to be very careful here. And sometimes it happens that the seller didn't mention a hole or certain stains, and you also couldn't see them on the photos. Now luckily this doesn't happen too often, but it has happened to me that I ordered some ties, for example, and they looked completely fine on the photos, but when they arrived in person, there were some stains on the ties, and also with a sweater that was uploaded as like new, and it was completely fine in the pictures. It also had 2 holes that the seller didn't mention. So keep in mind that you may run into some issues. And one condition that you can't see on any pictures is the smell of the clothes. Because when you order online, you never know if it's going to have a very old or musty smell, or whether maybe it was from a smoking household. This is something you only find out once the item arrives. And most of the time, with dry cleaning or regular cleaning, usually the problem goes away. But there are some items, for example, I've read many reports from people who bought a vintage barber jacket that was stored in a barn. It can develop such a strong, musty smell that is almost impossible to remove. So if you want to be safe, then also ask the seller about potential smell, ask about any minor defects or stains, and in most cases, luckily, people are honest. The next issue might be one of the biggest ones, and that's basically that secondhand shopping actually encourages impulse purchases. And that's for several reasons. One of them is, of course, when you buy secondhand, you typically get a very good deal. And also the items are limited. And I'm sure that it happened to you. I mean, it certainly happened to me that I bought items just because they were from a good brand and at a very good price. And the problem here is that if you buy a new item, let's say you walk into any store right now and you see a jacket that you really like, you could go back in 3 or 4 weeks and the jacket would still be there. So that gives you a lot of time to think whether you actually want to buy it. But with thrifting, there's typically only one piece of the item that you want. And that really encourages this fear of missing out. And I must say that this has happened to me multiple times. So what can you do about it? I would say before you buy any item online, whether secondhand or new, take at least 1 night to think about it. Ideally a little bit longer, let's say an entire week. And then if you're still thinking about it and you ask yourself the question, is it something that you really need, something that's missing in your wardrobe, or is it only something that you want in the moment, but deep down you know that you might not wear it that often? And even more importantly, ask yourself if you would still buy the item if you had to pay the full price. One issue that not a lot of people talk about are the hidden costs associated with thrifting. Because one of the benefits of thrifting are the low prices, but normally we forget all the costs that come afterwards. Because you still have to add shipping on top and then potential alterations and also potential dry cleaning as well. Let's say you bought a sport coat for $50. Then you had to pay $5 for shipping. You had to make a couple of alterations in the sleeve length and the waist. Maybe you have to pay another $30 or $35 for alterations. And then in order to prevent any potential moths and to get rid of the musty smell, you have to bring it to the dry cleaner, which costs you another $10. So now the $50 jacket already cost you $100, which is still a great price. But if you consider the previous problem that it can lead to a lot of impulse purchases, what can actually happen and what did happen to me is that you buy more items than you should have. And then on top of that, you also need to do alterations for those items. And then you need to bring them to the dry cleaner as well. And then it really adds up. So sometimes it's better to buy one item new that fits you perfectly, that you really like, than a couple of items that you sort of like, that were cheap secondhand, but then you still had to do some alterations as well. And that's why it's important to calculate the total cost before you make a purchase. This brings me to the last problem, and that's basically the amount of time it takes to buy secondhand. Because it can actually be a pretty fun experience. It can be nice to go to thrift stores or to spend time online and look through different offerings. I personally enjoy that, but not everybody enjoys it. And you have to keep in mind, your time is also valuable, right? If you spend 4 or 5 hours to find a jacket or shirt, if it takes away time that you could have spent with your family, or maybe even time that you spend at work, it might not be the best investment of your time. Especially when you buy secondhand clothes online, you can end up spending hours sorting through different websites and different posts. So I think if you want to reduce the amount of time that you spend on this, it's best to actually go at it with a plan. So if you know which items you're actually looking for, it's going to reduce the amount of impulse purchases, and you're also going to be less distracted when you're actually shopping. But the second approach to thrifting is to actually just accept the fact that it takes time and to not have a plan and just go with the flow. So if you go to a thrift shop, for example, if there's anything that really catches your eye, you go with it. And otherwise, you just sort through it, you enjoy the time there, and that's it. I think those are the two primary ways to go about it. Gentlemen, those were 5 issues that I've personally struggled with when buying secondhand clothing. If there are any others or certain tips that you want to share, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and see you next week.